Hey everyone, Function here. Today I'll be showing a quick guide to how I code a breadboard for a fighter aircraft. So for now I've got a design I've built a while ago. Now I'm just going to quickly delete the breadboard I have installed and I'll build one from scratch essentially. So the first thing I like to do when I build a breadboard is I first get the primary target info. This gives you the information about the target of your AI. And I also put in a steering point info. So essentially what I first want to do is to make it choose if there's no enemy present. I want the breadboard to follow the AI steering point, otherwise I want it to go to, engage the target. So first off, I'm just going to set this to say, can't see this because my record button is blocking the editor, but so I'm going to set this to say A, B, C, and for B and C, inputs B and C, I'm going to set, the first thing I'm going to set is target distance. So what this means is that if there is a target, we'll use the enemy's distance information, otherwise we'll use the steering point information. This isn't that important, but it's, well, for distance anyway, it's not that important for distance, but it's very useful for the rest. So next I'm also going to do the same thing for altitude, and I'm going to do this again for your bearing. Just copy and paste this. Okay, so that's the first thing to do. Now, next thing I want to do is I want to do a few calculations. So what I want to find is I want to find out when what angle should I pitch at to pitch at the enemy essentially. So that's just going to use a bit of trigonometry. So first thing I'm going to need the target altitude. If this is correct, yeah, that's the target altitude. I'll need the target distance, and I'll need my own altitude. So if you know some trigonometry, then you'll know that the angle to pitch at is just the arc sine of, I believe it's B minus C over A. So this will give us our pitch data, and what I'm going to do next is say as a placeholder, I'm just going to say if there's a target, I want us to pitch at it. Otherwise, I want us to pitch at, say, some constant altitude, and for that constant altitude, let me write down something. So I'm going to say, let's pitch to reach an altitude of, say, 350 meters as a cruising altitude minus A over 550. And for this, it's a good idea to clamp my altitude just in case we exceed some limits, and this will output an NaN. So I'm just going to clamp our altitude between, say, 500 and 0. And this will go in here, and this will go in here. And I'm going to need an orientation input, so I'll need a pitch. Multiply that by -1 because that's just how PIDs work. And if you'd like a bit more expansion on that, do refer to the Ohm is Futile tutorial. I'll link in the description. Yeah, there we go. Pitch up. So this should tell us to pitch at where we want to go essentially, and I'm just going to set some placeholder numbers. This works pretty well for general purposes, but of course it's a good idea to tune your inputs properly. So that's our pitch PID. Now this is a basic setup. I'll be expanding on this later. I'll quickly label this so I know what we're looking at. So that's pitch. Now I'm going to figure out the distance. So I'm going to put this, again, I'll do this to multiply -1, and I'm going to say if there is no target, if there's no enemy, we want it to head straight to the next waypoint. Otherwise, we want to maintain, say, a tailing distance of negative 350 meters. Okay, and we'll pipe that in. And again, we want our propulsion. This one should go to forwards. Forwards back. And that should tell us to head towards the next steering point. So this I will label as well, forward, back, forwards PID. So we keep an idea, and just to make things easier on ourselves for later when we start expanding on this breadboard a bit, I'm just going to spread it out a bit more to make it easier to see. Okay, now the last one is I am going to figure out how we turn towards, actually not the last one, sorry, the second last one. Now we're going to want to turn towards the enemy. Again, -1, nothing new here. PID controller, what is the PID controller? I'm going to set it to always turn towards the target. And again, this will want to be 0.1, 10, 0.1. Propulsion, where is propulsion? I cannot believe I keep forgetting. Yaw. Okay, so this will tell us to yaw towards the target. And now the actual last one, I'm going to just quickly set our roll to be, so let me label this real quick. So this should be multiplied by -1. So for now, I'm just going to set the roll to always keep us level. So I will set the roll to go to 0. And I am going to set this to go into the roll propulsion, of course. So now this basic setup should let us have a aircraft that, well, it flies. It won't be very good, but it'll fly. And let me just quickly check if I have, yeah, there we go. Let me just turn that back to 0 and we'll see if this works. So it's pitching up. We're going to stop pitching up. Okay, it's leveling off. Okay, pitch up's a bit too aggressive, but it's roughly working. It's trying to pitch down, it's just not doing it very well, because now it's okay, just reloading it. Now, because it's not trying to pitch up so aggressively, it is flying pretty stably. So now what we'll want to do is we want to actually expand a bit more on the breadboard and make it a bit better. Okay. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to check if the target is above a certain altitude. What this does is that if the target is a plane, ideally, I want it to go for a dogfighting behavior. Otherwise, I want it to go for attack runs. So I'm just going to say if there's a target that's A and B is greater than some altitude, which we'll say, let's call it 60 meters, then we want this to activate our dogfight behavior. I'm also going to add another clause here, so I'm going to have a complex controller, and I'm going to set this to activate by O. Now, I need to actually assign O to something, so I just need to find some space to stick in a ACP. Okay, so I'm going to say that if the target has a volume that is within 0 to what I will say is, let's call it 3000 cubic meters, then we want it to activate O. So what this means is that if the target is small enough, then and it's flying, then we'll assume it's a plane. Otherwise, we are going to assume it's an airship or it's a ship, and we're going to do our attack runs. I'm going to say that if this is true, then we want it to, of course, go for dogfight behavior, which means we always want to yaw towards the enemy. Otherwise, we want it to do something else. And what the something else is an attack run. So now I'll set up an additional clause. I'll say that if the target distance is less than 500, so the target distance is less than 500 meters, we want it to break off. And how do we actually make it break off? Well, we'll say condition A, actually, sorry, forgot something. So there is a target. I wanted to say there is a target, and the target distance is less than 500 meters. I'm going to say, let's output a 15. Let's start a 15-second timer. This can be shortened actually. Let's start a 10-second timer. Otherwise, we'll start counting down from this 10-second timer. C, and this will be A and B, or output 2 more than 0. So what this essentially says is, what I've essentially got here is I have a timer if I actually finish the inputs, so into sphere delta. So what this says is that if there's a target and the target distance is less than 500, we're going to start a countdown of 10 seconds, and 10 seconds later this is going to stop outputting true and it's going to start outputting false, so we're going to want to turn back in. Okay, so there we go. As you can see, we've got a timer running here, and so what I'll say is, if this is true, while this is true, I want it to turn away from the enemy, so negative sign B times, let's say 170 degrees. Oh. Otherwise 0. Okay. Otherwise it turns back, essentially. And actually I'm going to add another clause and say that, as you can see, this is not a very clean breadboard, but it gets the job done. So if this is still counting down, or if the target's too far away, more than, let's call it 1,500 meters, then we turn back in. Oh, sorry. And the target is within 1,500 meters, we'll turn back in. If it goes outside 1,500 meters, so that means we've gone too far, and so we'll be forced to come back, or at least we'll maintain around the 1,500 meters range, because it's going to turn in and then it's going to turn back out again. But at least you won't start running away from the battlefield. Okay, this should go into your PID, and I probably want to clean this up a bit, so bear with me for a moment. Okay, let's do a quick check to see if this actually works. So I'm going to spawn in a crossbones. This should tell us we are too close, and so we should be trying to turn away. And it's doing roughly that. As you can see, it's quite high, which is why it doesn't go as far as you would expect, you might expect, but it is coming back in and then it's turning back out again. Control is not great, but that's something we'll be figuring out in the breadboard later. Okay, cool, seems to be working. I'm going to destroy the crossbones and let's get back to coding out the breadboard. Okay, now the next thing I want to do is, if we are coming in for an attack run, I want it to pitch at the enemy. Otherwise I want it to pitch at, let's say, some target altitude. I'm going to lower this actually, so we don't have a repeat of it going to space. Right, so what those mean is this comes into your PID, and let me just make that a bit more obvious. So this is the input to your PID. So I'm going to say that if this is equal to 0, which means, we are trying to turn towards the enemy, then we are going to pitch at the enemy. Okay. We're going to pitch at the enemy. Otherwise, we're going to pitch at this target level. A equals 0, B otherwise C. And I can actually combine that with this clause, because this clause just tells us to pitch that if there is a target. I'll just add that in here and I'll say that, and there is a target. Now that is actually most of what we need. But I'm going to actually take this a step further and add in one last component to make the breadboard shine a bit more. Actually, I'm going to add in two more components. So the first one is, if you haven't noticed, this is a single engine fighter, which means that I actually want to maximize my sort of control surface effectiveness. I'm going to want to roll towards the enemy. I want to roll so that I can pitch directly at the enemy. The way I do that is actually through a bit of trig, and what I'm going to say that is, oh boy, this is going to take a while. This is all trig, so actually it's not really perfectly accurate. It's something I found that works for me. It's something I found works well enough to actually be accurate. You would take, if you're first in the mathematics, then you take you work in spherical polar coordinates and you take projections, but I'm not going to bother with that. I'm going to actually do something very similar to when we were looking for the angle we pitch at. Instead of this, I'm going to say we want to take, instead of the sine, we're going to take 90 degrees minus that angle, so that's going to be cos, and that's going to be multiplied by the sine of the target's bearing, which is here, sine this. Now we don't always want to be pitching at the enemy, so we don't always want to be rolling to pitch at the enemy. We want this to happen if the enemy is a plane, which means we're dogfighting. But if it's a ship, we don't really want to be rolling upside down. Well, you could, but not for this one, I don't think. So I'm just going to say this: if the condition A is fulfilled, then we actually, hang on, what did I put A as? Sorry, not A. Not A. Delete this, wrong input. Okay, so if the target is a plane, then we are going to roll to pitch towards them. Otherwise, we're going to do a very simple 90 degrees multiplied by how much we're trying to yaw by. And you'll notice I'm taking the output from the PID. This will be actually quite important in a bit, and we'll see why in a bit. Okay, so now it should be trying to roll towards 90 degrees. Great. Now you'll notice that it actually started immediately trying to nosedive, and the reason for that is because I haven't set up any roll orientation. So what we want to do is that if I'm rolled 90 degrees, my yaw should now be translated into trying to pitch up, and to pitch up I should be trying to yaw left. So how do we set that up? Well, there's a few different ways. I'm going to show the method I find the easiest to set up. Of course, not necessarily the case for everyone. Different people have different preferences. This is my own method. And really, functionally, this is just a remapping. So any function that works, there's not like a fixed function that is it's not like it only works for one given function. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a very simple trigonometry based remapping. So I'm going to say my pitch multiplied by cos of the roll angle, and I'm going to divide this by some amount. This second part is not strictly necessary, but because when you're adding together stuff, you can have outputs to your pitch and roll yaw that exceeds 1, and essentially what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to normalize it so it doesn't really exceed 1. It's not like your plane will stop working without it, but it will improve control a bit. So that goes into the pitch. So this essentially says that if the roll is 0, then all the pitch output goes into pitching up. If not, then some of it has to go into yaw, and that's the bit that we're going to set up now. So I'm going to copy all of this, except this is going to go into sine, and this is going to go into the yaw output. So let me just put in a sum component just to make things easier if we actually do want to do that stuff. Okay, sum. I'm going to do something very similar for the yaw output. So if there is no roll, and I should have piped in roll to output B here. So if there is no roll, then everything goes into yaw, otherwise some of it goes into pitch. So now, do notice that we actually need a negative sign here, and that's just because of how the orientation works. And I know I said this would be the last thing, but I'm actually going to add one final thing. So what I want to do is that if we are too low, A is less than, let's say, let's call it 100, let's call it 70 meters. I'm going to want to pitch up. Otherwise, if we're too high, let's call it 500 meters. I'm going to want to pitch down. Otherwise, we're going to pitch towards wherever we want to go. And it's just a way of fixing things, just so you don't have to worry about your aircraft going into the water for whatever reason. Otherwise, you're going to want to go B. Okay, and this goes into the pitch PID. Okay, now we see that the roll component has to be tuned. There we go. Cool. Now it's trying to go to space, so what we'll add is we'll do a very basic what's it called? A thrust vectoring. So if it's trying to pitch up, I'm going to just multiply that. So this is how the way I've got my engine set up. This is already going to work, but if not, you might want to play around with how you orient your exhaust, or just check when you change the yaw settings and the pitch settings on your engine how it moves. Generic block setter. There we go. So I'm going to set it to small jet controller, pitch angle, and it's going to try to pitch up. Let me just quickly check if that is working. I might have named my no. Okay, it's trying to pitch at least. And I'm also going to do something similar for the yaw. Except because of how I've got my engine set up, I need to multiply this by -15. But otherwise it's really the same. Okay, cool. Let's see if it works. Great. Seems like it's working. And I'm just going to quickly test this against some Seal Striders stuff. Because, I mean, they've got some of the better aircraft in my opinion. Okay, let's send it against like a squad of Harkeys. Okay. Well, forgot to add anti-collision, and I forgot to add a clamp to the forward-backwards propulsion, so I'll do that now. Yeah, as you can see, it stops because it's trying to maintain distance. It's trying to stay 350 meters away, but they're too close. So I'm just going to set this to 0.5, and I'll set the upper limit to 1, of course. And so that should stop us from stopping, maybe. And you can play around with collision avoidance. You probably would need to, because the breadboard can't check for collision avoidance like AI can, but as we can see, it seems to be working fine. It's not rolling as much as I would like, but that means I've probably got a mistake with my roll calculation somewhere. So I'm just going to switch off its firing mode, and I'm just going to try to stop these Harkeys from killing themselves. Roll is fine, but it's trying to, there we go, I forgot to do assign D. There we go. Cool. So now we can see it is trying to roll to pitch at the enemy. Very nice. There we have it. That's a basic guide to how to set up a breadboard for a dogfighting aircraft, and you can add a lot more components to it. I do recommend adding, say, missile avoidance, projectile avoidance. There's other tutorials out there, so I'm not going to cover those in this video. But that's a lot you could do with it. Just experiment with your breadboards if you do decide to make a dogfighting AI. It's really fun. Trust me on this. This has been Icon Function. Hope this has been helpful, and I'll see you guys next time.